Hi Fareez, how have you been doing?
I'm well. How are you, Rochelle?
I'm great. So let's begin with the case. Alright.
Sure.
Please estimate the number of law books in India.
All right. May I just take a minute to gather my thoughts?
Sure.
Okay. Before I begin, I have a few questions so that I can get a clearer picture of the case.
Yes.
Do I look at individual buyers only or institutions purchasing law books as well?
You may consider both here.
Okay. And for what period do I calculate the number of books?
You can calculate it for a period of 1 year.
And just to confirm, we will be focusing on finding the number of new law books sold, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so we can strike out the second-hand purchases and sale of those books. Um, do we consider only physical copies or do we consider ebooks as well?
That's a good question. So we'll focus only on physical copies of books sold.
Okay. May I take a minute to draw up a framework for the case?
Sure, sure. Take your time.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead with my structure. First, I'll list down all the major areas that law books can be found. So we've got government libraries, high courts and smaller court libraries. Then we've got corporations maintaining their private libraries, individual lawyers, boutique firms, small accountancy firms, and schools. If these seem okay, I'd like to delve into each of these particulars individually.
Sure. You may go ahead.
Okay. So starting with government firms, I'd like to assume that there is one library in each state,
Mm-hmm.
taking a conservative number of 30 large libraries throughout the country, if that's fair.
Yep.
I'd assume that this library stock has to be replenished every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I assume that these large libraries would have a stock of, let's say, at least 2000 books, which is 2000 into 30 libraries replenishing their books every 3 years, gives us a figure of 20,000 books. Um, Next, can we move on to high courts and Supreme Court libraries?
Yeah, sure.
They are 25 in total. We assume that they refresh their books every 2 years, and they have to basically refresh their books every 2 years.
Okay.
And now, assuming that these libraries do have 10,000 books in an average across them, we end up with 5,000 books per year being bought. And
Mm-hmm.
in that case, for 26 libraries, we'd have 5,026 books, which would give us a total of 1,30,000 books per year. Does
Okay.
that seem all right?
Yes, it does.
Great. Now, for smaller courts, I'd like to assume that many courts would either not have well established libraries or they might just have reading rooms in these small libraries in smaller quantities.
Interesting. So, what makes you say that?
So, in my knowledge, these courts either have no libraries or they have reading rooms for the judges to use. In these cases, the number of law books purchased would be of a negligible value. Further, their rate of refreshment of these books would be lesser than the rate of high courts. Hence, I'd like to consider the books purchased from this department as negligible. Does that seem all right?
Yes, yes, it does. Go ahead.
Okay. Coming to corporates with private libraries, if at least 50 big law firms maintain private libraries in India and they refresh their books every 1 to 2 years, let's say, I'd like to assume a prudential value of about 5,000 books. We'd have about 1,25,000 books purchased every year. Does that seem all right?
That's fair. Go ahead.
Great. Now, assuming that the number of small accountancy firms and boutique firms, the purchase is in lesser frequency as well as in lesser quantity when we compare it to larger firms. So the rate of renewal of editions would also be a lower frequency.
So you can consider their demand to be negligible and move on to the next category.
Sure. Next, we've got schools, which will have the primary demand for these books. And we can divide this into three categories, that is, law students, then we've got accounting students, and we've got schools, libraries. Does this seem okay?
Yes, it does.
All right. Now, for the law students, I'd like to divide them into two parts. One will be students pursuing 3-year courses, and the other are students pursuing 5-year courses.
Okay.
Now, let's say the 3-year courses have 6 semesters each, and with an average of about 5 subjects in each semester, which requires a total of 30 books per student per year. And the 5-year course has 10 semesters each with the same average of subjects. So that would give us about 50 books per student per year. Oh, I'm sorry, not per year, across the 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, considering that there are nearly 1,200 law colleges where the courses offered are in the ratio 3:2, since 5-year courses are more popular based on my knowledge, there are about, let's say, 1,000 seats available, while 3-year courses have about 500 seats. Are these values fair to assume?
These are fair. You can move on.
All right. Further, I'd like to assume that 70% of this population purchases, new books, and 30% would rely on libraries and borrowed copies, from senior students. Also, law books are pretty expensive, so I think 30% is a fair estimate. Do you think the same?
Yes.
Okay. So this brings us to a rough 2 crore 50 lakh books sold every year in schools for students.
Okay.
Moving on to libraries, if we apply the same logic that their renewal rate is 2 years with the same, 1,000 law colleges, and assuming on average they have about 5,000 books, we end up with 30 lakh books in total. And can we go on to the accounting students now?
Yes, sure.
Great. So accounting students, they have 3-year courses with 6 semesters, and let's say they study law in approximately 3 semesters, on the assumption that there are about 1,500 colleges with the strength of 800 students per college. We can end up with a figure of 36 lakh books per year, uh, over the 3 years. So if we sum everything up, we end up with a total of about 3.2 crore law books sold in a year in India. Do you think that's all right?
Yes. So your approach was very exhaustive and interesting. So I think we can close the case here. You've done a great job. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.